Milton had three ground rules. No gimmicks, no talking down to the audience.
Because this is exactly the same kind of a factory that my mother worked in when she came to this.
No pre-written script.
Is that the number of handlooms roughly doubled in the first 30 years after India's independence.
The free market enables people to go into any industry they want, to trade with whomever they want, to buy.
Chichester recruits producers from the best of British television. 30 years later, at a London hotel where early conversations about the project were held, Chichester, Michael Latham, Sir Anthony Jay, and Eben Wilson remember the good times.
It's been a tad.
Yes, sir.
Thinking back to the time I met him, I mean, Milton was already a kind of god to me because all my life I'd wondered why I was too stupid to understand economics. And then I read his Playboy article and I thought, oh, if this is economics, that makes sense. I can understand that. And then one day in 1977, the phone rings, and I pick it up, and it says it's Milton Friedman here. And it's like saying, oh, it's the Queen here. Are you free from home? It was extraordinary.
My first meeting with Milton and Rose, I said, look, I think you should know, I know nothing about economics. In fact, until I arrived here, I couldn't even spell it. We went to places that were vital to understanding what he was talking about.
If you want to see how the free market really works, this is the place to come.
We go to Hong Kong in its heyday,
A place with
where everything's a free market.
Like America a century ago, Hong Kong in the past few decades has been a haven for people who sought the freedom to make the most of their own abilities.
Made a huge amount of difference to the show because you could see it in action.
I've often been asked over and over and over, who wrote the script for Free to Choose? My answer is, there was no script.
Program 10, sequence 29, scene 2268. Take, I think I had it 25 or something.
One of the sequences I remember where Milton had to operate in extremis was in the Federal Reserve Bank in New York in the gold vaults. It was all a little threatening. And we sat Milton on some gold bars.
A huge pile of them.
Pile of gold bars.
These vaults, where the U.S. gold was stored, provide an excellent test of where the Depression originated.
Isn't it true that one of the things that he most enjoyed was stopping the presses that were printing the money?
That's right.
Showing how you can stop inflation.
Political freedom cannot be preserved unless inflation is kept in bounds.
And you just say stop. But if you don't print the money, you won't get the inflation. You stop the proximate cause. And I think that gave him more pleasure than anything else. At the moment he'd stopped inflation.
What happened to all that noise? That's what would happen to inflation if we stopped letting the amount of money grow so rapidly.
And there on his shoulder all the time is Rose. And she's a true academic too. She was absolutely vital. I'm absolutely convinced that without Rose, we wouldn't have got the same sort of theories.
Free to Choose is broadcast in Japan and every country in Europe except France. Rose and Milton edit the soundtracks from the programs into a best-selling book. Translated into 16 languages, it sells over 1 million copies. Following the production of Free to Choose, the Friedmans find a long-sought hideaway outside San Francisco. The discovery of Sea Ranch is the answer to Rose's lifetime love of the ocean. Much like their beloved New England, this area along the Sonoma coast of Northern California provided Milton and Rose a quiet and peaceful place to think and work.
Milton really wanted to live up on the hill, but I wanted to be on the ocean. So I could hear the waves all night long and, just smell the sea air. It was heaven.
Mostly, when we went on hikes, it was mostly in the redwood forest, in the hills above Sea Ranch. And in some ways, that's the best part of Sea Ranch.
That's the very best part of Sea Ranch. I don't know, it was just a relaxed life, for one thing. No speeches, no anything else.
When Free to Choose is first broadcast on PBS in January 1980,
thank you very much.
America's presidential campaign is already underway. Ronald Reagan is trailing President Jimmy Carter in the polls. But in November, Reagan wins in a landslide. Many think Milton Friedman's ideas may have had something to do with the result. Thomas Sowell was one of Milton's students. He is now a senior fellow with the Hoover Institution at Stanford University and a syndicated columnist. Sowell watched the election very closely.
I'm convinced that Ronald Reagan could not have been elected in 1980 except for what Milton Friedman wrote in the years preceding that. That there had to be a climate of opinion which is receptive to certain ideas.
I think by espousing these ideas in both technical and in popular media, eventually also in Free to Choose, a television series, the country became much better prepared to accept them when Ronald Reagan put forward some of them in his own inimitable and persuasive manner.
After the election, Reagan asks Milton to join his Economic Policy Advisory Board, along with George Shultz, Alan Greenspan, and Martin Anderson.
They were reinforcing what Reagan wanted to do. But Milton was incredibly persuasive in that role and had a lot to do with the fact that they actually passed it and it went through.
Reagan limits government spending, cuts taxes, deregulates major industries, and supports a monetary policy long advocated by Milton.
We should go further in reducing tax rates and making the whole system more fair and simple for everyone. But before we can do that, we must correct and control a budget system that has run amok.
You can't miss the Friedman-esque characterization of the world that one hears in Reagan speeches.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The free market is an engine of economic progress, and as an ancient Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu said, govern a great nation as you would cook a small fish. Do not overdo it.
Milton has this extraordinary capability of talking to high school students and presidents of the United States in exactly the same language, the same demeanor. He is indifferent to whom he's speaking to.
All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty together.
It's the issue, the idea that is so dominant. And he did that with Reagan. He did that with Nixon. In fact, he's done it with everybody I know, sometimes much to their disconcertion.
I have no doubt Richard Nixon had the highest IQ. He was the smartest of the lot.
I will not take this nation down the road of wage and price control. However,
but what Nixon possessed in intelligence, unfortunately, was not matched by his character.
They are really an easy way in for more trouble.
If he could do it without cost, yes. But he was not willing to pay enough to stick by his principle.
I am today ordering a freeze on all prices and wages throughout the United States for a period of 90 days.
Ronald Reagan was altogether different.
The Congress passed legislation in '78 requiring the budget to be in balance by fiscal year 1981. But just like Rodney Dangerfield, that legislation didn't get no respect.
He was a very intelligent and widely knowledgeable person.
Was not passed in time to comply with the law.
But he was not an intellectual in the sense in which Nixon was an intellectual. But he had very strong principles, and he was willing to stick by them.